share, for instance, with evidence, counter-evidence about hookah, about all the ethical breaches they have done. So, those who work on cigarettes can do the same.
Well, isn't the problem being that scientific fraud isn't technically a crime? It's not a crime as such, is it? Unethical science?
The problem is that the anti-smoking organization are those who fix the rules, the framework of what can be considered as scientific evidence. If you wish to prove, to demonstrate that a study, for instance, is false, you have to publish a study in a peer-reviewed journal. The problem now is the peer-reviewed journal. It's very difficult for an independent smoker, for an independent researcher to publish in such journals. It's very difficult because of these global link networks. For instance, I have mentioned the invisible conflicts of interest of peer reviewers who say they are not independent, they do not receive funds from the pharmaceutical industry, and they are in fact affiliated with the Global Link organization. So I think this is a great conflict of interest, and I think this covers many journals that are concerned with papers on smoking. So,
just one thing I'd like to bring up, and something I should have mentioned earlier. A couple of weeks ago in the European Parliament, yet again, there was a conference that took place. This conference took place on the auspices of, I've forgotten which committee it was. However, it was about the impact of lobbying on public policy. And it was sold as that. Now, as I think in most countries, but I know definitely the UK, the impact of lobbying following the expensive scandal, the impact of lobbying on public policy is a major issue. However, a very quick scan of what was going on there, it wasn't about the impact of lobbying on public policy, it was about the impact of tobacco lobbying on public health policy viz. The smoking ban. Be aware when you see this sort of stuff coming up in the press, that a lot of the campaign to ban lobbyists isn't about a campaign to ban lobbyists, because after all, the people who are campaigning to ban lobbyists are, what's the word for them? Got it, yeah, they're lobbyists themselves. It's not about that, and be aware that this is where this is coming from. I just thought I'd throw that in. I haven't studied the papers that came out of it, but dare I say, at the bottom of it, I did notice that there was a small logo saying, stop the tobacco-free Europe, that was it. Now, be that as it may, it is something that people should be aware of when they see this in the press. It is actually coming from a specific and driven perspective.
So, further to the lobbying and the funding of lobbying, one thing that will be interesting as we go forward is looking at, in particular, jurisdictions where there are changes of government, whether new governments feel the pressure from below to take a look at what has become, I think, a corrupt relationship between government and huge chunks of the public health community. You know, the classic case that happens certainly in the UK all the time, where the Department of Health decides it wants to go forward with a certain policy, but needs a piece of quote-unquote research to prove its case, so it funds an anti-tobacco NGO to go out and quote-unquote conduct that research, which, surprise, surprise, fits the government's plan, and we sort of go round and round and round. And in the British case, for example, if the Conservatives win the forthcoming general election, will they have the, how should I put it, genitalia to inspect that funding relationship? Given the need to cut where one can cut and save those precious taxpayer pounds, will money that is, I think, clearly does not need to be spent, will it be underlined and then crossed out. It's an interesting test, I think, of how serious a party, either in the UK or anywhere else around the world, how serious a government is about not only saving money, but also how serious they are about turning things around so that policy making in the public health arena becomes more serious and less about politics.
If I could try and answer that a bit, I think that's precisely what I was talking about earlier. This is where freedom of information inquiries are best served. They're not going to tell you. I doubt very much these genitalia you talk about are large. And I
Take
guess
your word for
the
it.
only way you're going to find out is by asking questions after the fact.
Sorry, can we get over to Marius?
Another thing that we're talking about very discreetly, so I'm going to let the cat out of the bag here. I don't think it'll work in Europe because your government is set up differently. But it might. It's your government. You need to check it out. These nonprofit organizations who are advising our legislatures are undermining the sovereignty of your country. We're looking if there's an angle for treason. Pretty serious word. Used to be called malprison of treason, where a public official passes a law that goes against your constitution. England or the UK used to have a malprison of treason law. Whether or not it's still in effect is up in the air. United States is. Some states specifically, but federally for sure. When you mentioned the forces was talking about a lawsuit a couple of years ago, we did all the groundwork to do it, but we could never get funding to do it. Without funding, the attorneys wouldn't even talk to us. So again, we are shot down by lack of funding. Anybody else?
Actually, yes, I would like to add a little bit to what Marietta just said. I mentioned getting funding from the alcohol industry and the casino industry, and maybe even the tobacco industry. We do need some kind of funding base to reach out to an extent that people will really hear us. The big casinos have an enormous amount of money. They stand to lose. Say a casino conglomeration like you would find in Las Vegas or in Atlantic City or any of those big casino conglomerates, they stand to lose tens of millions of dollars every month under a smoking ban. And they're smart enough to know that. They should be smart enough to realize that they could take 1/1000th of that money and give it to our kinds of groups and save themselves those tens of millions. So far, we haven't communicated that to them. We need to find a way to do it. And also with the big alcohol companies.
Well, I think a good example can be seen here in Holland, what happened when 1,200 bar owners unite their forces and bring money together. You are able to win these things because the legislation is badly done and it's based on floating sand. So the problem is that it is very difficult to get so many people together to generate funds that are big enough to pay good lawyers and to run lawsuits. But I think it's possible. We've showed that. And it might be an example for other countries as well. France, for instance.
Well, now I